You really thought you could take advantage of my daughter and get away with it?" The voice on the phone was icy, powerful like a storm behind velvet curtains. Marcus Bell gripped the receiver, his hand trembling. He never imagined a single act of kindness would lead to a billionaire threatening to destroy his life. 3 weeks earlier, during a violent storm, Marcus, an overnight nurse and single father, had spotted a soaked, frightened young woman alone on a deserted street. Without hesitation, he offered her shelter in his modest home, where he lived with his 7-year-old daughter, Ava. The young woman introduced herself as Emily, a college student who'd lost her phone and wallet. For 2 weeks, she lived with them like family washing dishes, laughing with Ava, and sharing quiet dinners that healed something inside her. But Marcus never suspected she was actually Charlotte Hale, daughter of Gregory Hale, the ruthless CEO of Hale Holdings, a real estate empire worth over $200 million. When Charlotte left with only a handwritten note of thanks, Marcus thought it was the end of a strange but meaningful chapter. He never expected it to trigger a war. Within days, Gregory Hale launched a legal and financial assault, false kidnapping accusations, blocked school, tuition, frozen accounts, all to punish Marcus for simply opening his door. But Gregory Hale had underestimated the wrong man. Marcus had documented everything. The first sign that something was wrong came with a knock on the hospital's boardroom door. "Marcus," his supervisor said, avoiding his eyes, "we've received an anonymous complaint about your conduct outside of work. You've been temporarily suspended pending investigation." Marcus Bell stood frozen. He was 34, a night shift nurse who had never even received a warning in his 10-year career. The room felt colder than usual, and as the words sank in, all he could think about was his daughter, Ava. How would he provide for her now? 2 days earlier, Charlotte Hale, the young woman he'd taken in during a storm and who had lived with them for 2 weeks, under the name Emily, had left without warning. She left a kind note, thanking him for everything. But now, her father, billionaire Gregory Hale, had discovered where she'd been, and he was furious. The phone call had come shortly after Marcus's suspension. Gregory's voice was low, venomous. "You really thought you could take advantage of my daughter and walk away? I'm going to destroy you, your career, your finances, and your custody of that child. Everything." Marcus had grown up in the foster system. He knew what it was like to be underestimated, to be treated like trash by people who had power and money. But nothing could have prepared him for the systematic way Gregory Hale began dismantling his life. That afternoon, Marcus returned home to find a court officer searching his apartment under a suspicious emergency order. His daughter clung to his leg, confused and terrified. "Daddy, why are they here? Did we do something wrong?" she whispered, her small voice cracking. He knelt down, brushing a curl from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We did the right thing. Sometimes, doing the right thing makes powerful people angry. But we're going to be okay." He didn't say it aloud, but inside, he was already preparing for war. What Gregory Hale didn't know was that Marcus had recorded everything, not because he was paranoid, but because it was habit. Hospital protocols required strict documentation, and he applied the same care to his personal life. Every conversation with Charlotte, every shared moment with Ava, every kind gesture had been recorded, time-stamped, and stored. 3 days after the first call, Ava's school called to inform him her tuition had been blocked due to legal complications. His health insurance stopped working. His bank account was frozen without explanation. Even the landlord of his modest apartment received an anonymous tip suggesting Marcus was trouble. At every turn, the walls closed in. And yet, Marcus remained calm. He spent his nights going over recordings, organizing files, and reaching out to Sandra Green, a civil rights attorney he'd met years ago while testifying in a workplace discrimination case. Sandra arrived the next morning, armed with coffee and questions. "I've heard rumors," she said bluntly. "If Gregory Hale is coming after you, he's not doing it." For the first time, She laid out files on Marcus's kitchen table, newspaper clippings, old court records, whispered stories from former victims, a teacher who'd fallen in love with Gregory's niece, an artist who dated his eldest daughter. Each time, Hale had used the same tactics: financial, strangulation, legal intimidation, and public humiliation. And it always works, Sandra said, her tone hardening, because his targets are people like you, ordinary, overlooked, easy to ruin. Marcus stared at the files, then looked at his daughter drawing in the corner with quiet innocence, her world shrinking by the day. He's making a mistake this time, Marcus said, voice calm, jaw clenched. I'm not just some nurse he can erase. I've documented everything. And I'm not alone. Sandra smiled for the first time. Then let's show him what a real fight looks like. Over the next few days, Marcus's small apartment became a war room. He and Sandra worked through the night, analyzing every message, every financial anomaly, every veiled threat from Hale. They filed early motions, set up encrypted backups, and quietly reached out to investigative reporters. But the turning point came when Marcus received a late-night call from Charlotte. Her voice trembled. Marcus, I didn't know what he was planning. I'm so sorry. I overheard. Picked him on the phone. He's sending people to your house tomorrow morning. They're going to plant drugs. Then he's going to call the police. Marcus felt the chill in his bones, but his voice stayed level. Where are you now? Hiding in his office. I've been recording everything. Calls, emails, threats. I didn't know who to trust until now. Sandra, listening on speakerphone, nodded and hit record. Charlotte, she said, we'll protect you. And those recordings, they could be the key. By morning, they had a plan. Marcus took Ava to Sandra's safe house and returned to a surveillance van parked 3 blocks from his apartment. Sandra had coordinated with trusted officers and installed hidden cameras and microphones throughout the apartment. At exactly 10 a.m., 2 men posing as technicians entered the home with a lock-picking kit and a suspiciously heavy toolbox. Every moment was captured. Every word about planting drugs, every step matching the pattern Charlotte had warned them about. An hour later, the police arrived, tipped off by Gregory Hale himself. But this time, the trap was reversed. Instead of finding Marcus, they found the hired men caught in the act, and the surveillance stream playing live for district attorneys and reporters already on standby. Within hours, the story broke. Gregory Hale was being investigated for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted framing. By evening, he was trending worldwide, not for his wealth, but for his crimes. And Marcus? He held his daughter close as they watched the news. Ava looked up and asked, Daddy, is that the man who tried to hurt us? Marcus smiled and kissed her forehead. He tried. But people like him forget. Some of us know how to survive storms. For most of his life, Marcus Bell had been underestimated. As a black man raised in foster care, a single father, and a quiet night shift nurse in the city's most overworked hospital, people rarely saw his strength. But Gregory Hale's relentless assault had awakened something that no billionaire could ever break: Marcus's unshakable resolve and his lifelong habit of documentation. It was the same instinct that had kept him safe through years of bureaucratic red tape, medical disputes, and unfair policies. Every form, every patient complaint, every odd conversation, Marcus had learned to record it all. So when Gregory Hale's campaign of threats, legal, sabotage, and false accusations began, Marcus didn't panic. He documented. In the small kitchen of his apartment, Marcus and civil rights attorney Sandra Green sat, surrounded by piles of evidence: flash drives, transcripts, digital backups, and screenshots. The room buzzed with determination. Look at this, Sandra said, pointing at her laptop screen. This isn't just harassment. This is systemic abuse of power. The same phrases, the same scare tactics, Even the same timeline. Gregory Hale has done this before. Her voice sharpened. But this time, he targeted the wrong man. Marcus nodded. He didn't speak much these days. Every ounce of energy was focused on building their case. But there was a quiet fire behind his eyes. For the first time in years, the weight of being invisible to society felt like an advantage. Hale had treated him like a disposable pawn. Marcus was about to prove he was the king. With Charlotte's warning fresh in their minds, they moved quickly. Sandra installed high-definition surveillance cameras in every room of Marcus's apartment. Marcus organized directional microphones and time-stamped logs, mapping every square foot. If they plant evidence, we'll catch every second, he said calmly. True to Charlotte's word, two men disguised as technicians broke into Marcus's home the next morning. From a surveillance van parked nearby, Marcus and Sandra watched in silence as the men scattered small plastic packets under furniture, inside Ava's closet, and even beneath her tiny bed. Marcus clenched his fists but didn't flinch. His daughter was safe, and every frame was being streamed directly to Sandra's legal team and federal contacts. Then came the call that turned the tide. At 10:05 a.m., Gregory Hale contacted the local precinct, pretending to be an anonymous neighbor reporting suspicious drug activity at Marcus's address. His voice, partially disguised, gave specific details about a child in danger, details only someone involved in the setup could know. But Sandra had prepared for this. She had already contacted the Department of Internal Affairs, providing early warning of a potential evidence-planting operation tied to a powerful figure. When the police arrived at the apartment, they didn't just find the drugs. They found the intruders still inside, with the surveillance feed rolling. Hours later, Gregory Hale was informed that he was under formal investigation. His first reaction was arrogance. There must be a mistake. I'm Gregory Hale, CEO of Hale Holdings, he told the lead detective over the phone. This situation requires proper legal You are being investigated for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted framing of an innocent father. The officer interrupted coldly. You'll hear more from your attorneys. But his attorneys were already beginning to distance themselves. By the end of the day, Sandra had submitted the video and audio files to the district attorney's office. The recordings of Gregory's earlier threats, mocking Marcus's background, threatening his custody rights, and vowing to leave him homeless, were now official evidence. This is more than a personal vendetta, Sandra told a journalist from Channel 7 News who had quietly joined the story. It's a blueprint of how privilege operates when unchecked. Meanwhile, Charlotte, now safe and staying with a relative out of town, began forwarding emails, bank records, and voice memos from her father's inner circle. The documents revealed a chilling pattern. Gregory Hale had orchestrated at least 4 similar takedowns over the past 5 years. Teachers, artists, activists, all silenced with money, fear, or reputational ruin. But this time, Charlotte wasn't staying silent. I grew up believing my father's version of power, she told Sandra during a recorded call. But now I see it for what it is, control through fear. And I won't be part of it anymore. Sandra smiled after the call. We just gained our most important witness. As more media outlets picked up the story, public pressure exploded. Protesters stood outside Hale Holdings with signs that read "Justice for Marcus and Dignity over Dollars." A local judge fast-tracked the case into criminal court, but Marcus didn't celebrate. Instead, he kept working, printing documents, organizing timelines, and checking in on Ava, who was thankfully unaware of the storm still raging. "Daddy, are the bad people gone now?" she asked one night. "Almost, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her close. "Almost." That night, Marcus stared at a whiteboard covered in notes. Every arrow, every highlight, every fact was building toward a moment when truth would eclipse power. And yet, his expression wasn't bitter. It was patient, purposeful. He wasn't out for revenge. He wanted something bigger justice, not just for himself, but for every family who had ever been crushed by someone with too much money and too little accountability. When Sandra showed him the draft of the civil lawsuit, with Gregory Hale's name in bold letters across the top, Marcus simply nodded. "We're not just going after him," Sandra said. "We're building something he can't destroy." And Marcus knew she was right. He wasn't a victim. He was becoming a movement. It all came down to timing. At exactly 9:45 a.m., Marcus Bell sat in a plain white surveillance van, parked inconspicuously 3 blocks from his apartment. Beside him, Sandra Green adjusted the live feeds on her laptop, streaming high-definition video from every room inside Marcus's home. The screens glowed with quiet anticipation. The trap was set. Charlotte's warning had been clear. Her father, Gregory Hale, was planning to plant drugs in Marcus's home that morning, then use an anonymous call to trigger a police raid. It was the final move in a ruthless campaign meant to crush Marcus's life entirely. But Hale had underestimated 2 critical things: the brilliance of Marcus's planning and the courage of his own daughter. Charlotte had risked everything. After overhearing her father's plans, she had snuck into his office late at night and recorded every conversation, every order he barked into the phone, every cruel word. For weeks, she had been compiling emails, voice memos, bank transfers, evidence of systematic intimidation and criminal conspiracy. Now, she was working side by side with Marcus and Sandra, albeit remotely, to dismantle the Hale empire from the inside. "They're here," Sandra whispered, pointing to the rear monitor. 2 men dressed as maintenance workers approached the back entrance of Marcus's apartment. One carried a heavy silver toolbox, far too bulky for a routine plumbing job. The other jimmied the lock with a master key and slipped inside. Seconds later, Marcus and Sandra watched them on the feed as they began placing small plastic bags under Ava's mattress, behind the fridge, and beneath the bathroom sink. "Package it messy," one of the men muttered. "We wanted to scream guilty." Marcus didn't blink. His daughter was safe at Sandra's home across town, coloring with crayons and completely unaware of the operation unfolding. He kept his breathing slow. His posture relaxed, but his jaw tightened every time the men stepped into her room. At exactly 10:05 a.m., another screen lit up, this time showing the call log from the local police department. Gregory Hale had just phoned in a tip using a disguised voice. "I believe there's a child in danger at apartment 3B on Maple Street," he said calmly. "There's illegal activity. Drugs. A lot of them." He paused. "Please hurry." What Hale didn't know was that Sandra had already contacted the Department of Internal Affairs the night before. A quiet tip had been placed, alerting them to a potential evidence planting operation tied to a high-profile figure. In coordination with sympathetic officers, Sandra ensured that the response team arriving at Marcus's apartment would be fully briefed and fully wired. By 10:15, 3 squad cars pulled up in front of the building. Cameras rolled. Body mics were active. The officers entered the apartment and immediately found the 2 intruders still inside, caught red-handed, surrounded by planted evidence. While the entire event streamed live to civil rights attorneys, journalists, and the district attorney's office. 10 minutes later, Gregory Hale's phone rang. "Mr. Hale," said Detective Morrison, his voice cold and clipped. "We need to talk. Now." Hale, unaware that his plan had collapsed, responded with his usual arrogance. "Detective, I think there's been some confusion. This is Gregory Hale of Hale Holdings. I'd be happy to arrange a meeting through my legal—" "This isn't a meeting," Morrison interrupted. "You're under investigation for criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and attempted framing of an innocent civilian. Your attorneys will be notified shortly." Across the city, Marcus and Sandra watched as the story broke online. Breaking. Billionaire Gregory Hale under federal investigation for framing single father. Exclusive footage shows. Evidence planted raid. Thwarted by civil rights team. Channel 7 led the coverage. Within an hour, the Tribune, the Herald, and several National One news outlets followed suit. Headlines scrolled across screens. Hashtags trended. Public outrage exploded. Gregory Hale's carefully constructed reputation began crumbling like wet sand. And it didn't stop there. Charlotte, using her mother's surname to protect herself, released a public statement. I witnessed my father plan, fund, and execute a criminal operation to destroy an innocent man. I have turned over recordings, financial records, and legal documents that confirm a pattern of similar attacks over the past 5 years. My silence would make me complicit. I choose to stand for justice instead. That night, as Marcus tucked Ava into bed, she looked up at him and asked, "Did the bad man go away?" He smiled gently, brushing her hair from her forehead. "He can't hurt us anymore." "Why not?" Marcus paused for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes, when bad people try to destroy others, they dig their own holes so deep they fall right in." The next morning, Marcus received a call from the district attorney's office. The evidence they had compiled, with the help of Charlotte's insider access, was enough to file not only criminal charges, but civil suits. Multiple victims had come forward. Millions in settlements were on the line. Sandra, with tears in her eyes, simply whispered, "We did it." But Marcus didn't celebrate. Instead, he walked to his window and stared at the street where he had once picked up a frightened girl in the rain. That simple act of kindness had led to a storm, but it also lit the path to something bigger than justice. It was legacy. 6 months had passed since Gregory Hale was publicly exposed, indicted, and brought to his knees. For most people, that moment alone would have been enough, a rightful ending to a story of injustice, perseverance, and survival. But for Marcus Bell, it was only the beginning. The morning sunlight poured into his new office, now located in a bustling civic building in the heart of the city. Gone were the cramped corners of his old apartment and the fear that once lived in every shadow. In its place stood the headquarters of the Bell Institute for Social Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting families from systemic abuse, legal intimidation, and corporate overreach. The walls were lined with framed headlines. Single father topples, billionaire Charlotte. Hale blows whistle on father's empire, justice born from storm. The desk in front of Marcus was a controlled chaos of legal case files, grant proposals, and invitations from universities across the nation requesting he speak on justice reform. Yet amid all the change, one thing remained the same. His daughter, Ava, now 8, still ran into his office every morning, carrying her backpack and her boundless curiosity. "Dad, it's in the paper again," she shouted excitedly, waving the morning edition of the Promerous Tribune. The headline read, "Marcus Bell's Justice Institute helps 43 families reclaim dignity and counting." Marcus took the paper, smiling warmly. Ava had blossomed in the last few months, her natural joy returning now that the threats had disappeared. Her laughter filled rooms once, heavy with tension, and her strength reminded Marcus every day why he had fought so hard. "Dr. Green is here," Ava added, pointing toward the hallway. Sandra Green, once his lawyer, now his partner, entered with a stack of files. Since the Hale case, Sandra had risen to national prominence as a civil rights advocate, but she remained deeply committed to their joint mission. "I just got off the phone with the Attorney General's office," she said, setting the files down. "Gregory Hale has officially been declared bankrupt. The last of his assets are being liquidated to pay out compensation to the families he tried to ruin." Marcus nodded. "Good. It's not about revenge. It's about restoration." He had learned that justice wasn't just about putting the powerful behind bars. It was about building something stronger in their wake. The Bell Institute had already taken on 43 active cases, families being bullied by landlords, silenced by corporate intimidation, or caught in Endless cycles of legal manipulation. And they were winning. "We're finalizing the settlement for the Carter family next week," Sandra continued. "And the Thompson case? We might actually get criminal charges filed." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Let's keep going." Across town, the man who once sought to destroy Marcus's life now sat in a prison cell, alone. Gregory Hale, once worth over $200 million, had lost everything. His company dissolved, his accounts frozen, his family estranged. His name, once synonymous with power, was now a cautionary tale. A warning about what happens when arrogance meets accountability. He had written letters to Marcus from prison, 3 so far, each one more desperate than the last. Apologies, backhanded justifications, and finally offers promises to expose other powerful figures in exchange for leniency. Marcus never responded. "People like him don't regret what they've done," Marcus once told Sandra. "They just regret getting caught." His focus was forward. One afternoon, while preparing for a webinar with Oxford University, who had invited him to lecture on institutional corruption, Marcus received a surprise visitor, Charlotte Hale. She had changed. No longer the fragile young woman who had arrived at his doorstep during a storm, but now confident, grounded, and full of purpose. She had legally changed her name to Charlotte Morrison, honoring her mother's side of the family. Her inheritance, the only piece untouched by her father's crimes, had been used to create a national victims relief fund. "I'm studying law now," she said, smiling as she sat in the Institute's waiting area. "I want to help families like yours, like mine." Marcus listened quietly as she spoke, and when Ava returned from school and saw her face lit up. "Emily!" Ava cried out, running into Charlotte's arms. To Ava, she would always be the kind woman who helped make pancakes and built Lego castles, regardless of her last name. Later that evening, Marcus stood at his office window, watching the city lights flicker. He held a photo in his hand, one taken by a journalist during the day Gregory Hale was arrested. In it, Marcus stood in front of his apartment, Ava's hand in his, calm and unwavering. Behind him, police officers escorted Gregory out of a building, head down, defeated. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of transition. That one act offering shelter to a stranger had lit the spark. Not of scandal, but of transformation. Since then, Marcus had helped secure over $8 million in damages for families across the country. 12 corrupt executives had been arrested. New legislation was being drafted to prevent evidence manipulation by the wealthy. The ripple effect was real, growing wider, every day. But Marcus never chased the spotlight. He declined most interviews, turned down book deals. His mission wasn't about fame. It was about making sure what happened to him and Ava would never happen again. Before heading home, he paused at a plaque near the Institute's entrance. It read, "Justice is not the punishment of the wicked, but the protection of the innocent." Marcus Bell, founder. That night, after tucking Ava into bed, she looked up and asked, "Daddy, are we done helping people yet?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Not even close, sweetheart. Because storms may come and go, but what you build afterward, that's what truly lasts." As the first autumn breeze drifted through the windows of his modest home, Marcus Bell stood quietly in the doorway of his daughter's room. Ava, now peacefully asleep, was wrapped in her favorite star-covered blanket, a soft smile on her face as she clutched the teddy bear Charlotte had once given her. The world outside had changed. Power had shifted. Names had fallen. Empires had crumbled. But here, in this room, was the reason he had fought. Not for fame, not even for justice alone, but for peace. For months, Gregory Hale had tried to destroy everything Marcus loved. And for months, Marcus had responded not with rage, but with something infinitely more powerful: preparation, patience, and purpose. The media had painted him as a hero, the nurse who had brought down a billionaire, the man who documented every threat, every injustice, and flipped the system on its head. But, behind the headlines and courtroom victories, Marcus knew the truth. His greatest triumph was not Hale's arrest, but Ava's safety. Her smile, her laughter, her sense of security returned. One act of kindness had sparked it all, opening the door during a storm to a frightened young woman who called herself Emily, but was truly Charlotte Hale. Marcus never asked for anything in return, yet what he received was a chance to change not only his own story, but the stories of countless others. 6 months after founding the Bell Institute for Social Justice, Marcus had quietly become a national symbol of resilience, not through speeches or outrage, but through calm, consistent action. The Institute had taken on more than 40 cases, from wrongful evictions to financial gains, intimidation, helping families who never believed someone would fight for them, and each time he stood beside them in court or handed over a settlement check, Marcus reminded them, "You're not powerless. You were just unheard." Ava knew. Even at 8 years old, she could sense the shift. She would come home from school clutching newspapers, or walk proudly through the office lobby where her dad worked, waving at volunteers who now knew her name. Once, she told a teacher, "My dad stops bullies, even the ones in suits." And she was right. But the fall of Gregory Hale hadn't been the end of that bully. It had only revealed how many more existed, hiding behind polished desks and expensive lawyers. Marcus knew the work had just begun. He thought about that often, especially late at night after Ava had gone to sleep. Sometimes, he'd sit on the edge of his bed, scrolling through reports. Cases still pending, families still fighting. It was never ending. But he wasn't overwhelmed. He was driven. One night, Sandra Green walked into his office with a manila folder in her hands and an unreadable expression on her face. "He wrote again," she said quietly, handing it to him. Inside was a letter from Gregory Hale. The third one in 2 months. This one was different. No offers, no threats. Just desperation. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything," Hale wrote. "To be abandoned, to be hated. To realize your own daughter would choose strangers over you." Marcus folded the letter without reading more. "I do know," he said quietly. "I just chose to do better." Hale's empire had been auctioned off. His name stripped from buildings and contracts. His family gone. In prison, he was just another inmate. Once feared, now forgotten. And yet, even with nothing left, Hale still didn't understand what he had truly lost. Because power without principle is just an illusion. 1 week later, Marcus received another visitor, Charlotte Morrison, now using her mother's surname. She had just returned from Seattle, where she'd begun studying law with the help of the relief fund she created from her preserved inheritance. She entered the Institute's lobby with confidence, purpose, and something that looked a lot like peace. "I wanted to thank you," she said, sitting across from Marcus. "Not just for protecting me, but for showing me that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, patient, but unstoppable." She handed Marcus a thick binder. "This is everything I have. All the names, all the companies, every cover-up my father was involved in. I don't want revenge. I want prevention." Ava burst into the room moments later, fresh from school, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Emily!" she shouted, running into Charlotte's arms. To Ava, none of the complexities mattered. Charlotte was still the kind woman who braided her hair and sang lullabies when storms rolled in. Marcus watched them with quiet gratitude. Later that night, as Charlotte left and Ava drifted to sleep, Marcus returned to his desk. The phone buzzed. A call from a well-known television network, asking for another interview. He declined, politely. His victory didn't need a spotlight. It lived in every bedtime story he could tell without fear, every bill he could pay without a frozen bank account, every parent who no longer had to choose between silence and survival. Before turning off the lights, he looked at the plaque on the wall, the one Ava helped design. It read, "The strongest men aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who open their door when no one else will." That was the legacy Marcus wanted. Gregory Hale had tried to break a humble father. Instead, he had awakened a movement, one that would protect thousands of families, long after his own name faded into irrelevance. And somewhere, in a quiet prison cell, Hale was finally learning the truth. You can buy silence but not respect. You can threaten control, but never love. And you can build an empire on fear, but it only takes one act of dignity to bring it all down. Marcus didn't destroy him. He simply refused to be destroyed. And that, in the end, was the most powerful victory of all. In the quiet after the storm, Marcus Bell sat by the window of his new office, watching Ava play in the park below. 6 months ago, they were on the verge of losing everything: home, reputation, even each other. But now, as laughter echoed from the swings and the bell, Institute buzzed with purpose behind him, Marcus knew. They hadn't just survived. They had transformed. The man who tried to destroy them, Gregory Hale, was now a shadow, locked away, disgraced, and forgotten by the world he once controlled. But Marcus didn't celebrate Hale's fall. That wasn't the victory he cherished. The true victory was Ava's smile, restored, her sense of safety, her confidence to walk into the world without fear. The true victory was in every family the Institute had helped. 43, and counting. Each one a testament to what courage, preparation, and quiet strength can accomplish. Marcus had never asked to become a symbol of justice. All he did was open his door, one rainy night. And that single act of kindness lit a spark that changed everything. Sometimes, your greatest strength isn't how loudly you fight, but how quietly you endure, protect, and persevere. True power lies not in revenge, but in rebuilding something greater after injustice. One act of kindness, one moment of courage, can ignite a ripple that protects generations. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever stood up for what's right, even when it cost you? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because more powerful stories like Marcus's are coming, and they just might change the way you see the world.